do want to echo the thanks to the Benditson clan who are represented here today for supporting this, and congratulate Sherman for yet again putting together a rockin' house here with all kinds of things happening. You know, Bobby Benditson and Sherman Teichman share an extremely important quality that I want to elaborate briefly, which is if either one of them ever ask you to do something, just go ahead and do it. Because you're going to do it in the end, and you'll just save a lot of time by saying yes, which is kind of why I'm here right now. This is a wonderful event, and I think it's indicative of how we link together the Fletcher School. We are so proud to be a graduate school at Tufts University, to be part of this university with our undergraduate population. You are all very much a part of the Fletcher community, and we feel very much part of this Tufts community. And it's a joy to welcome so many folks here from other universities around the country, including, I see some from West Point and Annapolis. As a former military, a recovering military person, I have to give them a shout out. But we have so many here from so many places. My very, very happy role tonight is to introduce a great friend of mine of a decade, Ambassador William Bill Burns. Bill Burns has had an extraordinary 32-year career in the foreign service of his nation. He is also a scholar. We welcome into this scholarly place a PhD from Oxford. He has also served twice as an ambassador of the United States, once to Russia and once to Jordan. He knows this region that we're examining tonight deeply, both from his time as a practitioner in the region, as well as serving at the National Security Council and in the ultimate post within State Department focused on the region. Today, Bill is the second senior member of the State Department, only behind the Secretary of State, John Kerry. He is one of only 2 career Foreign Service officers who has attained that position in the history of the Republic. It speaks volumes about his professionalism, his deep knowledge of the world, and his sense of leadership that he would be chosen for this. He is also, I can tell you personally, endlessly kind. He is thoughtful. He is someone who leads by example in every case. He has also led the policy planning staff at the very heart of State Department's strategic process. You are in for an enormous treat tonight from America's leading professional diplomat, Ambassador Bill Burns. Please stand.
I am truly honored to join so many people I deeply admire, like Jim Stavridis, at this symposium. I was warned that EPIC was not just an acronym, but also an adjective for the breadth and length of the symposium's panels. And looking through the program, I see that these were indeed pretty credible warnings. So to allow a lot of time for questions and to make sure that I don't delay the beginning of this evening's distinguished panel, I promise that my remarks will be brief. Whenever I think of the value of brevity in public speaking, I'm reminded of a story that involved the famous author George Bernard Shaw. Shaw was hosting an event in London one evening, and the first speaker came up to him and asked how long he should keep his opening remarks. And Shaw told him he should probably limit them to about 20 minutes. And the speaker looked at him in horror and said, 20 minutes? How am I supposed to tell them everything I know in 20 minutes? And Shaw paused and replied, in your case, my advice would be speak very slowly. In my case, you don't have to worry to try to be brief. I wish I could also promise to be uplifting, but that's a little harder. The Middle East is a place, as all of you know, where pessimists seldom lack for either company or validation, where skeptics hardly ever seem wrong. It's a place where American policymakers often learn humility the hard way, a place where you can most easily see the wisdom in Winston Churchill's famous comment that what he liked most about Americans was that they usually did the right thing in the end. They just like to exhaust all the alternatives first. So I learned a few things about the Middle East during my own checkered 32-year career in the Foreign Service. I've learned that stability is not a static phenomenon, and that regimes which do not offer their citizens a sense of political dignity and economic possibility ultimately become brittle and break. I've learned that change in the Middle East is rarely neat or linear, but often messy and cruel, and deeply unpredictable in its second and third order consequences. I've learned not to underestimate the depth of mistrust of American motives that animate so many people in the region, and I've learned that we often get far more credit than we deserve for complicated conspiracies. I've learned that with all its stubborn dysfunction, the Middle East is a place where people and leaders are capable of great things, and that American diplomacy, with all of our own occasional dysfunction, can make a real and enduring difference. So let me first talk briefly about why the Middle East still matters in American foreign policy and how the Middle East is changing, and then outline several elements of a positive American policy agenda. What we can do to help shape, within the limits of our influence, the great generational struggle between moderation and extremism that is unfolding across the Middle East today. After a post-9/11 decade dominated by wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, it's not hard to see why Americans would seek to rebalance our priorities. We live in a rapidly changing world in which American interests are pulled in many different directions. I recently returned from a long trip to Asia, and it's obvious that the Asia-Pacific region is not only the most dynamic part of the global economy in the new century which lies ahead, but also a logical centerpiece of U.S. foreign policy. The transformation of the global energy market through the shale technology revolution is also affecting our views of the Middle East. With the United States likely to overtake Saudi Arabia as the world's leading oil producer in the next 5 years or so, and with the prospect of genuine energy independence for this country in the next 20 years or so, it's natural to wonder if we really need to pay so much attention to the Middle East. And it is a truism that America's chief foreign policy challenge is domestic renewal, strengthening our homegrown capacity to compete and promote our interests and values around the world. Tempting though it may be, we do not have the luxury of pivoting away from the Middle East, which sometimes has a nasty way of reminding us of its relevance. We don't have the luxury of pivoting away from a part of the world that holds some of our closest allies and a very sizable chunk of the world's oil reserves, on which the global economy is still dependent, even if we're headed towards self-sufficiency. And we don't have the luxury of pivoting away from a part of the world that holds several of the world's most poisonous regional conflicts and violent extremists who feed on the region's bitterness and alienation. We cannot, in short, afford to neglect what's at stake in a region going through its own awakening, at once promising and painful, and potentially every bit as consequential for international order as the changes which swept over Europe and Eurasia 2 decades ago. It's important to understand, I think, that this second Arab awakening, more than a half century after the first awakening helped end the colonial era, is about several different layers of change, within, among, and beyond Arab states. Within a number of states, the spark produced by a desperate Tunisian vendor, tired of too many indignities and too many lost hopes, proved highly combustible. Within months of that tragic self-immolation, a half-century-old political order collapsed in several Arab states, including Egypt, the biggest of all. Societies that for far too long had known far too little freedom, far too little opportunity, and far too little dignity began to erupt. But what also spilled out, in addition to the thirst of individual citizens for dignity, were all the demons of sectarian and communal tension that authoritarian rulers had forcefully contained. That dynamic, in turn, helped set off new uncertainties and frictions among states in the region, as sectarian troubles and old Sunni Shia passions spilled across borders still not firmly rooted nearly a century after their post-World War I formation. Meanwhile, beyond Arab states, violent extremist groups were quick to try to fill emerging vacuums and take advantage of post-revolutionary chaos. Non-Arab regional powers like Turkey, Israel, and Iran loomed larger as traditional Arab powers like Egypt turned inward, and major external players like China and India grew even more reliant on access to regional energy supplies. And across this whole shifting landscape, the second Arab awakening stirred up familiar debates about the role of religion in politics, gender equality, individual human rights, and globalization. What all of these layers of change add up to is the most significant transition in the Arab world since the revolutions of the 1950s. And what they have laid bare is the long-term question of whether an Arab center, as my friend and former Jordanian Foreign Minister Marwan Mawasher has described it, can eventually replace the old order, gradually establishing democratic institutions to manage sectarian differences and provide an outlet for political pluralism and individual dignity, or whether hardliners and extremists of one stripe or another will prove more resilient. The United States has a powerful stake in that very complex competition and in shaping a careful long-term strategy for enhancing the chances for a new moderate order which best protects our interests and reflects our values. What we need to convey is a clear sense of what we stand for, not just what we stand against. An agenda that offers a powerful antidote to extremists who are much better at tearing things down than building anything up. It seems to me that a workable long-term American strategy has three interconnected elements: support for pluralism and democratic change, economic opportunity, and regional peace and security. All three are crucial to our broader goal of enhancing the chances that moderates will shape the new regional order more than extremists. All three require us to look carefully at where the United States can uniquely make a difference, and at how best to mobilize other countries inside and outside the region in common cause. And all three require us to find a sensible course between self-defeating inaction and unsustainable unilateralism. We also have to be honest with ourselves. There will inevitably be some tough trade-offs among these priorities at different moments, and times when it will be hard to weigh the long-term benefits of pushing democratic reforms against short-term security demands. But all three elements have to frame our broader agenda. Let me touch quickly on each of them. Democratic reform can proceed in different ways and at different paces in different places in the region, but there won't be a moderate outcome to the second Arab awakening over the next generation without it. Whether in countries in post-revolutionary transition or countries trying to stay ahead of the wave of change through evolutionary reform, the United States consistently emphasizes a common set of principles: respect for the rule of law, peaceful and inclusive political processes, protecting the fundamental rights of all citizens, including women and minorities and people of all faiths, and steady focus on building strong democratic institutions, real checks and balances, and vibrant civil societies. We try to hold leaders and parties of every political shape to these standards. When it comes to building sustainable democracies, the most consequential distinction is not between Islamists and secularists, but between those who embrace pluralism based on rule of law and those who seek to impose their own vision on others. All parties need to engage in the political process and not sit on the sidelines. Those in power have a special responsibility to make clear that force is no substitute for politics and that a majority is no substitute for dialogue and consensus. And all must condemn and prevent violence, which truly poisons politics. Whether in fragile post-revolutionary states like Tunisia or Egypt, or in monarchies trying to keep pace with their people's expectations, like Morocco or Jordan. Sustainable democratic change depends upon the full participation of all citizens in political and economic life. The belief of all citizens that their peacefully expressed views are heard and respected, and the conviction of all citizens that they share a stake in their country's future. No democratic transition can succeed without a sense of confidence in a better and more inclusive economic future.